Welcome to the Competitive 40K podcast brought to you by Vanguard Tactics. This is a Warhammer 40K podcast where we analyse the meta and develop strategies to help you become a competitive 40K player. I'm your host, Stephen Box, and it is our mission to raise the standard of your game both on and off the tabletop. This podcast is brought to you by Vanguard Tactics and the Vanguard Tactics Academy, the only Warhammer 40k online coaching course. And the Vanguard Tactics Academy takes you through everything you need to know about 40k, from how to write the optimal army list for your faction, to advanced tactics on the tabletop and our step-by-step process for preparing for a tournament. Now, the VT Academy will not only help you win more games, but most importantly help you feel more confident and comfortable at the tabletop and really get the most value out of your hobby. So guys, this is episode 3 and this is an incredible podcast I have lined up for you today. I have the absolute luxury of bringing you the interview with Tabletop Titans. Now, I am joined by Tabletop Titans, who also are some of the playtesters for Warhammer 40k, and they have done an absolutely incredible job over on their YouTube channel, showing off some incredibly, fantastically produced streamed games. And I get them on today, Brian and also Adrian, and we talk about all things list writing. So let's jump over to that interview with Tabletop Titans now. Now, before we jump into this interview with the guys over at Tabletop Titans, I just want to say a massive thank you for absolutely everybody that's tuned in and also has left us a review. Of time of recording, we're currently number 3 in the UK and also one of the top 40k related podcasts over in Australia, Canada, the States, and many other places around Asia and Europe. So I want to say a huge thank you to absolutely everybody who shared this podcast, listened, tuned in, and left us a review. So every week we're going to share one of our most recent 5-star reviews as a massive thank you and a shout out for leaving these reviews for us, because it really does mean a lot to us. And this one comes from Donald J, and he said, if you're serious about competitive 40k, you need this podcast. Whether you go to tournaments or play pickup games, we all are competitive and we like to win. This is a great place to start, thanks to all of the Vanguard Tactics. So Donald, thank you so much. And again, I think I really want to, just reiterate that point. Yes, we like to win, and yes, we are competitive, but there's a huge difference between wanting to win and needing to win. And we're not the guys that want to win at all cost. We only want to win if we deserve to be the best general at the tabletop. So thanks so much for that review. Now let's head over to that interview with Tabletop Titans. As I mentioned, guys, we are joined today with 2 very special guests, and I'm a huge admirer of these guys themselves, and that is Brian and Adrian from Tabletop Titans. So, Brian, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here.
Honestly, thanks so much for coming on. And Adrian, how are you keeping today?
Doing well. Thanks so much.
That's all right. So, what I want to start off with, Brian, just give us a little bit of background in terms of what you guys do at Tabletop Titans, and also a little bit about yourself in terms of how did you first get into 40k?
So the channel is a place where we do live games, live battle reports. We do them twice a week, sometimes 3 times, mostly twice a week. We do it on Thursdays and on Saturdays. And we just try to play these really friendly but also tactics-driven games that have beautiful models, beautiful terrain, and we just really try to have a good time. And we've worked really hard to try and make a really polished live experience, kind of elevate the way that battle reports are done, particularly live. And we've had a lot of fun doing that. We also from time to time do tactics videos where we cover specific factions or deep dive on new rules, like we did recently for 9th edition. And we've been doing it for about 2 years. And really, we just have a great time doing it. It's a lot of fun. Yeah,
guys, you're like you said, I think you hit the nail on the head there. You've really achieved that. You've kind of given a real immersive, in the moment feeling of like we're with you when we're watching you live, which I think is exactly what you want when you're like a viewer or you're trying to consume that level of content. It's like we're with you. So I think you've absolutely smashed that kind of out the park. So yeah, all the effort you guys are obviously putting in is paying off, because what you guys are delivering is absolutely fantastic. So what was it, Brian, that when did you first get into 40k?
So I've been playing Warhammer for a very long time. but I started with fantasy, maybe when I was about 11 or 12. And I didn't get into 40K until 8th edition. So the very first day of 8th edition was my first day of 40K. And since then, I went a little crazy, and I've collected 20 armies in the last 4 years. So I'm a convert. I have a lot of fun with it.
Nice. Yeah, it's actually funny you say that because I started playing just before, like 3 months before 8th dropped, and my first ever event was the last event of 7th, which was like Unbound Warhammer World GT. It was mental, and then on the day we got released the new game of 8th edition. So I was very much the same as you, picked it up at that time, and 8th really sort of got me involved as well. So Adrian, what about yourself? What was it that kind of brought you into 40K, same as Brian, or have you been playing, sort of longer? What about yourself? What got you into the hobby?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's a funny story. My dad actually got me started. He, played way back, and as far as young as I can remember, I was holding a paintbrush, painting like some goblin models. I think was the first thing. It was atrocious but amazing. And so yeah, just started playing war games very early, and then started Warhammer 40K in 4th edition. Played it super casually for a few years, and then got into it competitively in 6th edition. And then from there, I just got completely addicted to just the community and playing competitively, and just kind of experiencing this whole other level of it. So that's always been my big thing. I love painting, love converting, and then love sharing it with people. That's been my big joy of 40K, really.
And what's one of the most recent things you've been sort of converting or working on hobby-wise?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I was just working on a new troop master. I hate how I can never identify my troop masters because they're the same kit as everything else. So I have some flipping and twirling troop masters from about 7 different kits, which is like my favorite thing to do ever.
Do you know what? That was literally the last model I converted with my 2 troop
Oh,
masters. Yeah,
that's hilarious.
we can have like a troop master off. Yeah.
That'd be amazing.
Because Harlequins is going to be my next army for the rest of the competitive season.
Yes. I'm extremely excited for them. That's probably that's actually the same for me as well. So really excited about that.
Yeah, their rules interactions just go, well, we don't care about the rules. We're just going to do our own thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to play our own game, and I'm like, yeah,
right.
I'm down for that. So no, guys, honestly, thanks so much for coming on. As I said earlier, now what we wanted to really share. Obviously, we spoke off air about this, and we were really thinking, what can we bring, the listeners in terms of, and if you are listening, where can we add value to you? So we've decided to look at list building, and we want to cover that from a few different areas. We want to look at it from, if you're, like, let's say sort of beginning your 40K career, so you're in the first sort of year of playing sort of semi-seriously, whether it's your local club, gaming store, thinking about doing a tournament, or a bit more than that. So let's say you are going to events, and you maybe want to start getting that sort of top half. You want to go 3 and 3, something like that. And then also some tips for those people that are looking to go 5 in 1, 4 in 2. So hopefully there's going to be some stuff here for everybody, and we can sort of divulge this as we go through. So Brian, I'm going to pose this one to you first. When we're looking at kind of list building, what is your, I don't know, let's just start with general inspiration. What is it that you think, okay, this army, I like that in a way, I'm going to start here, and I'm going to, I don't know, I've just said about the Harlequins. For me, the inspiration's like, I kind of know their thing. They kind of abuse all the rules in the game. That's where I'm going to make a start. What is it for you, Brian, that you think, okay, this is my sort of play style?
Yeah, so for me, it always starts with what the game type is. Like, am I building a tournament army? Am I just playing a casual game with a friend? Is this a narrative? Knowing the mission, knowing the opponent. I always want the game to be a good, fun, balanced game, and that does start with list building. And so I'd say that's a big thing. If you're just playing with your friends at home, take that into account and know what they have, what kind of thing they want to play, and make sure the 2 lists are matched. There's nothing, you might have this one big idea that you want to go for, and you go all in on it, and then it just crushes your opponent. And really, at the end of the day, nobody has a lot of fun with that. So I always keep that in mind first. But after that, I'd say I build lists around wholly different ideas. Like, either I'll build a list around a theme, and the theme could be, I want it to be all bikes or something like that. or you could build a list around a major centerpiece. It's like, I'm going to have this knight at the center of this army, or this major character. Or you could build around a tactic, like, hey, I'm Death Guard and I want to throw these grenades with 20 guys, and I'll build, everything is around that one idea. But more often than not, I build lists that are like chessboards. They're, I've got some pawns, some utility pieces, some queens, a bit of everything, so I can just play the game. And those are the kinds of things that are inputs for me for list building.
So just to then sort of pick that apart a little bit, what you're looking for then is an army that can kind of sort of a jack of all trades. It can do a little bit of this, it can do a little bit of that. You're not trying to build a completely like skew list. As I mentioned to you guys earlier, we had Don Hewson on last week, and he really spoke about looking at lists from a skew perspective of like, he's got this crazy amount of defilers in just toughness 8, toughness 9, vehicles, monsters. And that's a real skew list that can just steamroll some lists, but might really struggle in others. And you're kind of, am I right, Brian? You're looking at it from a slightly different perspective. You like to be able to do a little bit of everything, so you can play the mission, or you can get kills when you need to, but maybe around some sort of common theme. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, so it's a really strong divide between tournament play and friendly home play. And I think that even at a tournament, I generally don't like to skew too heavily, because you'll eventually meet your match, right? Especially if you're in some sort of GT. And I hate the feeling of having no play at the table, like arriving and it's a foregone conclusion that I've lost. I'd rather have harder games throughout, but it comes down to me having a chance to win in all of them, rather than having some easy matches and some impossible matches. So generally, that's my attitude. Yeah.
Oh, nice. And we'll sort of go into that in a little bit more detail. What about yourself, Adrian? What is it that maybe inspires you? And if we kind of use this sort of competitive, let's say we're building a list for the, obviously the GT mission pack has just come out, hasn't it? So let's assuming that's our kind of format, minimum board size. We're looking to go to an event. What about you, Adrian? What are you kind of thinking for lists?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I have a very similar philosophy to Brian in this regard, where I look for tools, right? I want an army that is a toolbox and that can kind of adapt to each scenario. And really, this starts at an army that can play the mission, right? So you're looking at something that can play the primary, that can play the secondary, and has the tools to adapt to different opponents and things like that. I prefer to basically have these options rather than go all skew, and then there's a lot of randomness. We don't always talk about it, but there is a lot of variation in who you play and who you go up against at a tournament. And with skew lists, I just hate that feeling of like, well, hopefully I don't pull this, and there's that high variance at the end of the day where that can happen. So I look at, how can I achieve these secondaries? Do I have multiple things that can do that, and kind of give me that space to actually play, give me options, really.
Okay, cool. No, I think that's a really nice way to look at the game, and I think really good advice for anybody that's got sort of going to a tournament. So let's dive in. Let's go into a little bit more detail. So pick a codex and let's go with it a little bit more detail, Adrian. So pick a faction that you've been working on recently for an army list.
Yeah, so one of the things I've been working on is Craft World Eldar, which honestly has taken a lot of hits in 9th edition. There's a lot of people trying to figure out what can work. They're not in a great place, but that's why I've been sort of intrigued with playing around with them. And so, we even had on stream a very skewed shooty list with Eldar, which is very traditional, does not play 9th edition very well because it doesn't have the tools, right? It just punches your opponent as hard as you can. And in some matchups that works. But in others, you just can't, and especially some missions where you can walk off objectives. That exists in, I think, a couple of the GT pack missions now. And so the list that I'm going to kind of play around with is one that has the tools for 9th edition. And what is that? That is great troops, great transports, and something that can hold objectives. So the core of the list is really, it's 5 Wave Serpents. I love Wave Serpents. I can't say enough good things about them. They're fast, they're durable, they shoot really hard. There's nothing. They're kind of like 2 Razorbacks put together, and then they can fly, right? They can have that firepower, and they can also transport things. So we take that, lots of Dire Avengers, and then a unit of Wraith Blades with the Ghost Shields. So this is the tool that I really don't have in other places in the Eldar Codex, right? Eldar really struggle in the new missions because they don't want to sit on an objective. They don't want to camp in a spot and take a hit. They want to kind of play Trixie, which worked very well if you're playing things like ITC in 8th edition, but in 9th, that just doesn't hack it. And so having that one unit that can sort of anchor in a third of the battlefield or a quarter of the battlefield while the rest can kind of play cagey has been really not only fun, but also actually lets me play the secondaries in a way that the army, I think, struggles with.
Okay, so I'm just going to sort of dive in there a little bit deeper. So
Yeah.
what you've done there is you've gone, okay, I need something that plays the mission well. So we're looking for OBSEC troops, and obviously Dire Avengers are
Yep.
fantastic for that. And I think with what Cycling Awakening brought them, only a little couple of things, but gave them, whether it's exploding sixes to hit, and you're looking, and also, I mean, I actually took a Suruman and I think 30 Dire
Yes.
Avengers in Wave Serpents to one of the ETCs a couple of years ago, and everyone was like, what the hell does this do? And actually, like, because he gives everyone a 4+ invulnerable save, all those Dire Avengers, you're just stacking on more durability, aren't you? So that's what you've done there. You've looked at, okay, what plays the mission well? So you're probably looking at this from more of a primary objective scoring potential, yeah? And then what you've done is, okay, how am I going to get there? You've built in your transports, that gives you a gun line, more durability, more mobility. And then what was it that made you think, okay, what was it that you sort of, what I'm interested in knowing is, how did you come to the conclusion of the Wraith Blades and maybe not something like Shining Spears or Scat Bikes, or what was it that you thought, okay, I really need, they plug a hole for me, those Wraith Blades?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the big things is the game is about mid-board control right now. You have to be able to take a hit in the mid-board. And Shining Spears are great. I think they can still work. We've seen some cool ideas with that thus far, even. But in melee, they just crumple, right? If anyone has decent AP, so I need at least one thing that I can pump up. I basically take a couple psychic powers and I pump them up to that 2-up save, 3-up invulnerable, fortune, just make them real tanky, and they can actually get charged and actually still survive, and they can play rescue for these other things that honestly can't, right? Wave serpents, depending on what's hitting them, they can take a hit, and that's fine, but I needed something that could get right up in our face, and I know it's going to get charged, and that's okay. That was kind of the X factor that I was looking for. Yeah.
So you've got your Wraith Blades in, and as you just said, you're now starting to add in characters to accentuate that unit, because they need a little bit more, don't they?
They do, yeah.
They need the Protect to go to the 3+ invuln. They need the Fortune to get the 5+ Feel No Pain.
Yes.
So you're then adding your characters then to accentuate your toolbox. So you've got, okay, Dire Avengers, Wave Serpents, they're doing the crux of the primary. Then, my Wraith Blades are going to be sort of bailing me out if I get in any trouble, can hold the board down. Then my characters. So then what else are you looking at in terms of, what are the weak points do you have in your list, or any like in all the playtesting you've done with this? Where's it breaking down, and what can you add in to sort of help maybe plug those gaps?
That is a great question. So the one weakness is definitely these alpha strikey infiltrating kind of armies, right? Things like Raven Guard that can move up the board turn 1 and get up into your face. I think if they don't have pregame movement, then I still have, I have 30 Dire Avengers, I have these transports, and in those matchups they become more throwaway units where I can screen out with 1 or 2 of them, and that's okay. But the power of getting things like Invictors or the Vanguard Vets with Thunderhammers way up, where there's no amount of screening that will save me from that. That's the thing I worry about, and this is something I've been looking to more and more often in my lists, is something that has a way of sort of screening out that midboard with things that infiltrate. I would have loved to have the old Ranger rule, right? That honestly would have been the thing I'm looking for, and I worry about it. I think that's definitely the big weakness in this list right now. I have to, in those games, play way further back, and then I'm playing catch up. The one upside, which I will say, is you can do that in 9th edition. You can say, cool, I'm going to be losing out on primary in the first couple turns. You can bring it back later on, and typically the secondaries that I pick, things like Engage on All Fronts, you can do that with throwaway units, things that are doing the screening, so they can kind of fulfill that dual role to try and mitigate what is really a tough matchup with this list.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
So then, obviously, now we've lost some inches on the board as well. It is a little bit harder to play that. I can remember one of the GTs I went to, and I was up against 10 Wraith Blades. And bear in mind, I used to run Wraith Blades myself. So I was like, these guys, if I go first, I'm hitting them hard. I'm fighting twice. I'm putting everything I can, because they need to die before, like you said, you can put all your powers on, right? So they need to go from an Alpha Strike perspective.
Right.
So then when you're backlining those guys, you can't do that so much on the board edge because it is, we've lost 12 inches basically on Hammer and Anvil in quarters, whatever. So cool.
Right.
So I'm going to pass over to Brian. What about yourself then? So what sort of list are you working on at the moment, and where did you start? Obviously, Adrian said he went for the troops and the transports. Pick a list. Where did you go with it? And then I'll sort of pick it apart again.
Yeah, so one of my classic factions is the Tau, and it's one of the armies that's changed the most in 9th edition. I think I can make a good case that it's the army that's changed the most in 9th edition, more than any other, and almost universally for the negative. So what was their strength is now their weakness. Tau has always traditionally been a very hard army to play, and I think you're going to have to be a lot more creative than you were before to play it in 9th edition, but it's still an excellent faction, but not if you keep trying to play it the same way. So I'm really trying to design new lists. And the main thing that Tau is afraid of is getting tagged, right? Now that you touch them, they can't fall back and shoot. So actually, I'm turning that into my strength. So what I'm trying to do is build an army that's the ultimate tagging army, the army that tags my opponent and makes them suffer from that more than I suffer from that. And so I'm looking through the codex for units that tag, and the ones that jump out at me are things like piranhas. Okay. Piranhas are crazy fast. They're super cheap and throwaway, and they even have 2 drones attached that jump off. And so even when you kill them, they continue to tag you. They're an excellent choice for me. And so there's other things as well. There's tetras, which are similarly cheap and throwaway for tagging. And I'm almost universally playing a Farsight Enclave army because the game is so much closer, tight-knit, and Farsight Enclaves is the one that wants to be up close. And also, Farsight Enclaves allows me to not pay for any marker lights in the army, which is a huge cost savings that I need in order to play the game with Tau's point increases. And I'm playing with almost no battle suits with the exception of commanders, because that way I don't really even have to have drones, because the commanders don't get shot. They only have to worry about getting charged. And if I'm tagging your whole army, I'm mitigating my ability to get charged. And so that's the way I'm looking to play. I still need to have troops in order to take objectives from you because, hey, I could tag you on an objective, but I still need to have OPSEC bodies. So the obvious choice is breachers. And so you put breachers up on points, tag every single thing, just aggressively charge their army, charge all units every turn if it makes sense, or just block them if it doesn't make sense, and just try to outlast. And that's the kind of playstyle I'm trying to build for Tau.
Yeah, and just to sort of pick on that a little bit more, I really like that, Brian, because I'm a combat player through and through. Like I'm Blood Angels, Harlequins. I'm not one for guns, So me, tagging is my thing. So what I'm looking at as a combat player on the other side of this is I want to tag you with the units I'm happy for you to shoot at. Whereas what you're doing is, because then I'm in control of the game pace. I'm telling you, you can shoot this unit in this turn. You're playing my game, right? But what you've done there, which is really clever, is you're saying, I'm going to tag you because I want to shoot that unit in a minute when we're still in combat. You can fall back. That's okay because I can shoot you, or we can stay in combat and I can shoot the unit I want to shoot at. So you can direct your efficiency of your firepower into the correct unit while shutting down their ability to fire back at you and also obviously fight, which I think is a really, really smart play. One of the guys, Jack, who's on my channel, he actually ran a Tau list. He still had his triple Riptide with ghost kills, dropped all the drones and just relied on that 3+ invulnerable save because then he wasn't tied to anything. He could still move out with those heavy hitters. And I think he's going to really find what you've just said really interesting. He's literally just got me to order some piranhas for him. So, I think he's definitely working on those same lines because you can't just sit back and shoot, right?
No, you can't. You can't sit back and shoot with the Tau. You almost never could, to be honest with you. You could sit back and shoot and you'd kill their army, but then they'd win the game. And that was almost always true. And actually, that's where most Tau players went wrong. You always had to take the center board with Tau. The problem is you used to be unassailable in the midboard. Like you would take it and no one could fight you for it. No one could shoot you for it. It was just yours. Well, that's not true anymore. People can outshoot you because your shield drones are so much more expensive that they'll get through your shield drones in one turn where they used to get through them in 2.5 turns. And now they can definitely tag you and you're out. And so, yeah, you cannot play that way with Tau anymore.
Yeah, and also they can just outlast you. Like if there's good terrain and somebody's using like the obscuring keyword well, or there's good ruins that block line of sight, they can just go, cool, I'm going to sit on the primaries if they're on the outside, because not all missions have objectives in the middle, right? So you can bunch up in the middle now if you want, but if there's no objectives there, then you can maybe, sort of pick a couple of secondaries that might work well. But I know a lot of Tau players in the past in ITC used to use the first two turns shoot, and then turns 3, 4, 5, and 6 move out, control the board, right? When they knew they'd broken the back of their opponent. But obviously you can't do that now with only 5 turns, especially when there's only really 4 turns of scoring, isn't there?
That's right. Yeah, the shorter game is one of the biggest hits to Tau because they were the army that played the long game probably better than any faction.
Yeah.
Because the whole army they started with, they would end turn 6 with most games.
Yeah.
And so the longer the game, the better for Tau. So that's a big change. That's all of it. You just got to play completely differently. In fact, you're almost playing Tau more like it's Eldar in a way. Is the way I think about it. You got to think of them more like an Eldar player. And I'm excited. It's great to be able to change it up, and it's forcing me to paint up a lot more piranhas.
Yeah, nice. No, so when is it then? And I'll go back over to you now, Adrian. So you've obviously got this concept of the primary that we need to score. We need to get the hold more, and hopefully prevent our opponent from getting their hold more as well, right? We need to try and constantly score, deny all the time now in 9th edition. When do you start to look at the secondaries in regards to your list? So obviously you must be kind of, I teach my guys on my academy to do a SWOT analysis of their list. What are the strengths, weaknesses, threats and opportunity of their list build? And then obviously does it match their play style, etc. And you've got all the things about, like you said earlier, Brian, about what models you enjoy, the look of and stuff. But when you've got a bit of a concept of a list, run it through this SWOT analysis. Now, Adrian, do you look at it from does my list hemorrhage secondaries, and am I giving my opponent just, here's 1,000,000 points, you're going to max out 45 against me? Or are you going to look at it as a perspective of, can I even score secondaries? Where do you look at that first, either denial or your ability to score?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I definitely start with my ability to score things, first and foremost, because that's where I have the most control, right? I can say, regardless of who my opponent is, I want to be able to count on these things, right? So that's why things like engage on all fronts, especially for mobile lists, is so powerful, because you can count on scoring that regardless of who you face. It's not reliant on saying, well, I'm going to abhor the witch, or I'm going to do whatever it is. So I generally start with that. I try to take things that I can score that are relatively independent of what my opponent is bringing. And then once I have that, that's when I start to look at, am I actually going to be hemorrhaging points? This always is kind of a tough decision, though, especially, as I mentioned, I do like things like transports. I think they're really powerful, but that's probably one of the biggest points in many of these lists where you do give up things, right? Bring it down is so powerful, and it's risky. But at the same time, if you're taking 3, 4, well, it's really around, once you hit about 4, you're almost giving up max points anyways, and at that point I think you play to your advantages, right? So for example, on my list, I have 5 wave serpents, and that gives up a lot of points. On the other hand, wave serpents are not things that they want to be killing. They're not easy. They're not reliable. That's a big thing. And so if they manage to kill all my wave serpents, then I'm probably in trouble anyways. And so I will have lists like that where I'll sort of double down and say, that's okay. These are points that they're going to give up, but they're going to have to pay for them in other places in the game. And that's really where that kind of comes into play. As far as other ones, I am trying to get better about knowing what I can score beforehand and what I can deny. This is, I think, really where the finesse in 9th edition is coming to play, and I'm still really trying to get a hold of it, right? We have certain armies that are really good at saying, well, I'm just not going to take the Psyker, I can count on the Abhor the Witch. We have armies that are really good at attrition, and that becomes difficult but interesting, I think, to manage, and definitely something I'm working on personally.
Yeah, so I've really enjoyed, how the secondaries have started to unfold for me. I've said this before, I had a little bit of ITC 9th edition, like change was hard. I come from a mission pack I adored. I loved it. I was getting on really well, crushing events. And Ninth Edition came out, and all of a sudden it's like, here's a big curveball. Everything you know is essentially changed. And what you sort of touched on there, I really like, because what you're saying is, you know somebody's going to take Bring It Down against you. So that's one variable you now know. It's kind of like if you're playing cards, you know they've got a king of spades in their hand, right? You know one variable they're more than likely to pick against you. And again, you can use that, to your advantage, right? Which I really like, because already you're going into that game. They're not going to know what three you're picking, but you're already knowing at least one they're going to pick against you.
That's right.
So then you can start to deny that. And as soon as you're in a position where you're like, okay, I can deny you just a quick 3 points. In fact, my Wave Serpent, backline that thing, and you're never going to touch him, and I can win that game. Because know you've baited them into that decision of the Bring It Down.
Exactly, 100%. This actually happened literally in my last game. The guy took Wave Serpent down to a single wound. That was it. And I was able to just hold it back, hide it behind obscuring terrain, and then at the last turn, I did pop it out. I did use the pop the Serpent Shield to just throttle that damage at the very last second. Use it. There's no more scoring at that point. He's had his turn. And this also comes back to that idea of the toolbox. So I take things like Quickening in this list, which I love because nothing in particular really needs it. The Wraith Blades generally will use it to get in, but this utility of being able to zip something particularly fast away out of engagement range or within engagement range lets me kind of have that flexibility to say, okay, I need to deny this thing, or I need to get over here, and kind of with the Wave Serpents that already move ridiculously fast, it gives me a ton of flexibility to basically deny those points at the end game, which is great.
Nice. So what other sort of secondaries you sort of opting for? You said you mentioned about the I'm going to categorize your army into kind of a fast moving, and essentially you're like a precision, like the Eldar are like a scalper, aren't they? I'm going to attack on this front, I'm going to destroy that element, and I need to then try and make sure I destroy everything that's either in a threat range so you don't get touched, right? Because as an Eldar player, you don't like getting shot, right? It's not enjoyable when you're Eldar. So you need to go in, precision strike, remove it, no threats in that area. So what are the secondaries you're going for? You've got engagement on fronts, which I love because like you said, you're in control of that. You know they're taking Big Game Hunter again, or not Big Game Hunter, but Bring It Down, should I say?
Sure.
What are the secondaries are you thinking? It's not a bad pick for me.
Yeah. So one fallback I can almost always take in the GT pack is deploy scanners. The ability to have these Wave Serpents moving up. And again, you can't advance and perform an action, right? So this makes things like transports particularly important because you can sort of move them up on a flank, have your guys move out with that extra movement. They essentially get 10 inches of movement even after the changes for disembarking, and perform the scanners. Again, they can die. This can sort of double with my engage in all fronts. It does only max out at 10, right? So this is something that is great for a GT where I'm not using battle points, where it's really just win-loss ratio. Yeah. For an RTT, it would be riskier, right? Because I am basically saying, I'm going to take this easier secondary, but I'm giving up 5 points, things like that. One that actually comes up a surprising number of times is Assassinate. I do take a Wraith Seer in the list. I do give them Mark of the Uncomparable Hunter. So now I have a Wraith Seer that can snipe with Star Cannons. And then, again, the Wave Serpents are really, really fast. And Eldar are particularly good at targeted kills, right? So I can maneuver them into a position where they can either hop over screens, be shooting into characters, or I can sort of burst down a particular part of their army and go for characters. This is one that I don't count on, but I will say it definitely does come up a lot. So those are a couple. Raise the Banners is one that situationally is good for me because, again, I can get those Dire Avengers up and then basically just body block and dare them to try to get through my Wave Serpents, get through all those bodies. And like you, actually, like you mentioned earlier, I actually do take a Sermon. In a lot of matchups, it doesn't matter, but against Space Marines, it matters so much. Their ability to like have that pervasive -1, -2 round on their bolters. Suddenly, it's not such a sure thing that they can actually get through those Dire Avengers. So those are the ones that I generally look for with this army.
Yeah, and that's interesting you said that, actually, because normally something like the Assassinate isn't always a good one to go for because your opponent can easily deny you those points. But I like that. Like you said, you're using your scalpel with your mobility to really maximize that and make the most of it. Nice. Okay, cool. So, Brian, I'm going to pose that same question to you then. Do you look at it from a secondary scoring, secondary denying, and what sort of secondaries are you preferring? So let's keep the Tau going. I love that. So what sort of secondaries are you kind of looking for there?
Yeah, so with my Tau, I think there's a lot of the same ideas of everyone needs to control the board. So that's why Engage on All Fronts just happens to be the one that a lot of us pick. But with the Tau, I actually sometimes consider behind enemy lines because
Hmm.
I have a ton of two-man drone squads. And again, these throwaway piranhas and things like that. And I'm fast. I can get up there, and you honestly, you often can't redirect your attention to those drones. And I can get more points with behind enemy lines faster than I can with Engage on All Fronts. So it's one of the few armies that I think actually would more reliably go for that one, which has turned out to be very effective. Tau is also a good army at choosing a couple main targets and taking them out. So if there's an opportunity to bring it down against your opponent, or if they have big characters or Titan Slayer or whatever I need to do, I can reliably kill whatever it is I need to kill, even if it's 4 or 5 Wave Serpents. It's plausible for the Tau to get through it, depending on what you brought. Um, After that, it does start to get a little more challenging. So my infantry is rare and they're precious, and so I can't do any of the things that require infantry actions. I can't reliably keep those infantry all game. Obviously, I don't have psychers, so I could go down. I could take down psychers if there's that opportunity. The mission specific often looks pretty interesting to me because I don't like that third option is pretty tough sometimes for the Tau. I almost can never get kill more because of all my two-man squads.
Yeah.
And so that's not on the table. Unfortunately, it often is for my opponent. But even in ITC, that wasn't as easy as people always imagined it would be because the Tau are a lethal army, right? And so you might pick up 3 or 4 kills, but I can too, no problem, right? So yeah, I think that's that last secondary for most armies, but for Tau is really tough.
So what do you do then, Brian, when you feel like, actually, do you know what, you're running this list and it's just, you're losing games potentially where you feel like, I've been in control of this entire game, but the secondaries are really punishing me. What can you do as a Tau player to change that? What could you do? What other tools have you got available where you think, actually, if I just make those few tweaks, then I can score these secondaries a little bit easier? Is it more troops in the list? Is it I don't know. It's the stealth suits. Are they infantry? In terms of
They're infantry.
They are.
They're infantry, but often okay. So they used to be one of those units, the only unit that Tau wanted to keep in magic boxes to keep them safe, and then Indirect had trouble dealing with them with the -1 to hit. But now that they're when they're up inside cover, people can shoot them. They're still paper thin, right? And so if I need them to complete an action for several turns of the game, someone's just going to remove them, right? And I can't stop them. And so I wouldn't take those risks. I'd say one of the very interesting ones for Tau is the While We Stand, We Fight, which is the keep 3 models alive. And the 3 most expensive models in a Tau army are often extremely durable. Let's say if I'm playing that Farsight army that I told you about, the 3 most expensive are commanders. And for instance, they might be 3 Cold Star commanders, which are very easy for me to keep safe if I want to. And you could spend the whole game running after me around the board. I move 40 inches. Like, you're not going to get me. And I'll put a long-range missile pods on them so I could keep them at arm's length, right? I'll keep them at 36 inches the whole game. And you're out of luck. You know what I mean? And so that is a very interesting choice. But every so often, you're going to come up against an opponent who can just race forward really fast and put the guns in because character screening is a lot harder. And, you could be in trouble. But in those matches, just don't pick it.
Yeah, because I was really hoping you would pick that one because, again, like for a traditional Tau player, so if they are running Riptides, they tend to be the most expensive. And I can't remember the last time I actually killed a Riptide on the table. I just kind of like play peekaboo.
It's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to kill them now because you don't get 30+ shield drones anymore.
Yeah.
Right? And so the way to play Riptides now is almost to forget about drones and just keep them on their 3-up invuln all game. And because you don't need the killing, you just need a tough boy to stand in the middle of the board and have his 3-up invuln and soak up. But even out of 3-up invuln, you're eventually going to lose them. It's just, does your opponent waste 3 turns of shooting to kill a Riptide? It's often that's a win for you in any regard. But the problem is they want to kill them anyways, so that could be a risk, right? So I don't know. I think about it. There's definitely some matches where it's not going to be worthwhile for them to get to the Riptide. But if they have a combat-heavy army, combat armies are going to chew through Riptides now.
Yeah, that's certainly something I know Jack's found, is that he's actually gone back to Taucep just to really maximize his Overwatch. So he's got more of a kind of the bark, sometimes even bigger than the bite. The fear of the 5+ Overwatch is sometimes worse than actually what it even does. But yeah, because that was
that's a tough problem, right? Like, because you could take the counterfire defense system on the Tau set, and then you're overwatching on 5s, re-rolling all Overwatch. So you're getting a lot of hits, and your Bark and Bite there are both very, very scary. The problem is whenever you're playing that version of the game, you're ceding control to your opponent. You're saying, okay, I'm here now. Now you get to determine how this game goes and what happens. And the problem is there's so many opportunities to just pile into things. Like, I'll charge this one thing that's out of cover. I'll do a big swing on my pile in, and now I touched your Riptide anyways. And or hey, there's so many things that ignore Overwatch that it's saying like, okay, I'm going to build a castle, and the objectives are so spread out. So okay, I build a castle on the right hand side of the board. I'm giving you the whole rest of the board. They don't even need to come and engage with you. They're just going to hold the rest of the board and win. And to me, it's strong, but it just doesn't play 9th edition.
No, nice. And Adrian, I'll pose this question to you. In your experience, obviously, all the games that you've played, is there like a certain amount of secondary points let's look at the primary first. What do you think is a decent score on the primary where you think my primary score puts me in a winning position? And then, we can then talk about that from a secondary perspective. Because as you mentioned earlier, you're going for things like deploy scramblers. You're not going to max out the 15 for that. You're not going to get your 45. But what you can do, obviously, is you're hedging your bets. So what's a decent score to win that game? So what do you think is a winning score for both of those?
That's a great question. So let's see. For the primary, really, I'm looking at trying to get an average of about 10 a turn, right? So this means sometimes I'm only going to get 5, which is really, you're trying to avoid this. But again, on the I forget if it's domination or the other one where you have to have 2 and then 3 objectives to get the 10 points. That can be tougher, right? So I'm kind of keeping an eye on this throughout the game to make sure at least I'm getting about 10 a turn. Ideally, we're going to get a turn or 2 of 15, but you take what you can get. For the secondaries, it's kind of similar. I really want to at least hit that threshold of 10, really 12. I think getting higher than 12 can be really tough on some of these. They'll say, well, okay, I can get, so bring it down, for example, I know I can kill these 4 vehicles and that'll give me 12 points or whatever. And then the rest is kind of questionable, but I'm okay with that. So generally I'm looking at, so I guess that would be like 40 for primaries and the 36 for the secondaries. Feeling pretty good about that then. And then it becomes a denial thing too, right? I think the primary points, it's like, okay, I'm trying to get 10 in a turn, but I'm also trying to deny the points to my enemy, and things like taking them off of the ability to actually hold more. So you say, okay, well, I held this much, and they can really control that. But if you can burst them off of one objective, well, they're losing them 5 points is basically the same as netting you another 5 points. So that's really where I look to where I can actually have that control back in the game. Because sometimes it's just tough. You have scoring your own primaries relies on your movement, but also turning the others is really, really important.
Yeah, I think that's I love what you've said that, because actually we found it. Obviously, I've recently just run my tournament a couple of weeks back, and it was the first event of essentially 9th edition here in the UK, and some lists absolutely hemorrhage CPs. Secondaries.
Victory points, yeah.
Yeah, so my first round, I was up against literally a Baneblade and a load of tanks. So I simply took Linebreaker. So for example, my Linebreakers are 3 units of Inceptors. You can't really zone those out. They drop down. You've got 9 models, toughness 5, 3 wounds. You've got to put some, and I've got a bit of redundancy in there. So they got me an easy 15. I killed all the tanks, another easy 15. And then and I always go for While We Stand We Fight, because I've got Tigerius, Calgar, and then my company Ancient. So I maxed out the 100 points. And that was something that, again, my opponent, when I explained it to him about what his tanks were doing, and that he didn't think about my Linebreaker, and he kind of let me score those. He wasn't considering, how do I deny Steve, because he had all the troops, and he could have used his tanks in a different way to zone out the backfield, but he just didn't really think about, how do I deny Steve 15 points? He probably couldn't touch me on While We Stand We Fight. That's 15 points I'm probably going to get. And it's rare that I'm never going to score those. But then, because he's hemorrhaging so many on the the vehicle aspect, and then didn't deny me on the line breaker. It kind of let me roll with it, let me sort of take the game away. But yeah, I think that was one thing that we definitely found in our early, it was kind of like throw everybody in the mix. Let's see what happens. In secondaries, we felt that people were consistently getting anywhere from 35 to 40 points on the primary. Yeah. And people that were losing their games were often getting about 25 points.
Right.
But it was really in the secondaries where we had some massive swings. It was because of people not thinking, how do I deny? Whereas in ITC, it wasn't as much of an important aspect because they were only for so many minimal points now. But Brian, have you got anything else there to add in terms of like any advice for denying secondaries off your opponent, or things you can do to deny your opponent any secondaries?
Yeah, I think that as you point out, everyone's building their list to play the primary. Everyone's going to get their roughly 40-ish points on the primary if they're, they know what they're doing with the game and they built their army right. So you're right, the games are largely won and lost on the secondaries. And it's not enough just to score your own points. You absolutely do have to deny. And one of the things you could do, even if you can't deny your opponent to secondary, you can make them have to overreach to get it. You can make it so that they have to give away too much. For instance, while we stand, we fight. You've got these crucial characters that you could keep safe if you want to, but you want them to be playing the game. You paid a lot of points for them, and you want them buffing your units. And you can make it so that, okay, if they're up here buffing, then they're at risk of someone blasting through the screen and getting to them. So now you need to be extra defensive with them, which may even force the opponent to be extra defensive with the whole line that they're protecting, putting them entirely out of position because of the secondary they picked. So cool, you got your 15 points, but your whole army's out of position for you to get it. And now I'm picking up extra primaries, etc. And so that you definitely, even if you give up the points, make them suffer for it, I think is really, really crucial. And you always have to pick secondaries that are going to allow you to play the game that you want to play anyways. Like when you sit up at the table and you're trying to pick which secondaries, even if you're going to get less points on a secondary that is something that goes with your game plan, I would almost always do that rather than something that's going to completely derail what your army's supposed to do. I think people see, oh, shiny 15 points over here if I go do that. But if it derails your whole army plan, you're going to lose more than those points somewhere else, whether it's in the primary, another secondary, etc. So those things are always important to keep in mind. And I would say almost look for a single weakness in your opponent's secondaries. Like, okay, they've got while we stand, we fight. I think I could take all 15 of those points from them in a surprise tactic, right? Or, hey, they've got behind enemy lines. I'm never going to give them one of those. And if it's too much to keep in your head to deny all their secondaries, just pick one, drop them to 0 on it, and just make sure you get your roughly 8, 10, 12 points on yours, and that game's yours.
Yeah, that was actually something I did in my Custode game. He took Linebreaker. He had loads of deep striking units. Turn 1, I put all my units on the board, advanced everything, and I played like zone block in here, and I just went, right, you're gonna have to deploy by turn 3 in his own deployment zone. So I'm going to deny you those 15 points, and the rest we can sort of hash out in between us. So I really like to, and I don't know if you guys ever do this, is when I get to the tabletop, and when it's in that moment of you've got to pick your secondaries, and obviously you do this simultaneously, rather than me thinking about what secondaries I'm going to pick, my first thought is, what secondary picks are they more likely to pick against me? And then can my picks then counter them so that I can actually, while they're trying to score them, I can use those for another role? So can I use this unit to do something else? So I'm going to make you, like you said, overreach. And I think something like engage on all fronts, if I think, right, this opponent's easily going to go for engage on all fronts, so therefore I might actually go for attrition because I know you're going to be feeding units at me every turn. I know you're going to try and get your engage on all fronts, so I can just pick up those 2 little units you're feeding into my deployment zone and then deny you any other kills.
So yeah, there's actually something else to that that's also you could do is you think about what secondaries they're going to go for and what tools you need to stop them. So for instance, you might have your inceptors that you're going to be using for behind enemy lines, but you might determine, oh no, I need those inceptors to be extra screening units to stop their behind enemy lines. Yes. So I'm gonna change that plan and I'm going to take a secondary that I can get and use that, repurpose that asset into denial rather than into offense.
Right, exactly. And this actually came up when one of my recent games was playing Death Guard against Raven Guard. Tons of character sniping, no psychers. So of course I have 3 juicy psychers that if they stack Assassinate and Abhor the Witch, that's 8 points for each of those psychers. Then if I double down on knowing that they're likely to pick this, Why We Stand We Fight. So my Demon Prince is suddenly worth 13 points. And I say, cool, well, normally he's kind of the speed stick, he moves up. But now I know there's 13 points in this basket that I have control over, especially with things like Cloud of Flies. And just say, I got to remember, it's not about killing things, it's about playing that mission, keeping him back, backlining my casters, even if it means they're not doing the role they're normally doing, but they're denying so many points. That's 8 for each of those other psychers and 13 for him. That is a whole lot of points that you suddenly have more control over rather than your opponent.
Yeah, nice. I really, really like that. Do you think sometimes people can fall into a bit of a trap? Adrian, I'll pose this question to you. Do you think people go into a game thinking, I always take these secondaries, this is the secondary I'm going to take? Because on one side you think, well, having a bit of a game plan before you get to the table is good. It can stop decision fatigue. Maybe then you can just look a little bit more critically at some other options. But do you think sometimes people fall into a dogma of, I'm going to put these units in strategic reserve and I'm going to use these secondaries?
100%. And I think, we've always seen this, but I think it's doubly a thing now where, again, as you mentioned earlier, ITC beforehand, the secondaries at the end of the 8th edition were very, very easy to score. It was almost like, you're losing the game if you're not maxing out on your secondaries. Now they're much harder, right? And so people come to the table and they say, I know I'm going to go for whatever, Assassinate if I have all these characters. I know I'm going to bring it down. And kind of like we mentioned earlier about the fact that, yes, there's a lot that happens at the list building phase. What secondaries am I planning on? What are they planning on? But then there's still what can happen at the actual table. And so it's hard. I still do it all the time, is remembering when you actually need to move away from your plan. You're going to give up on the utility of something. You're going to pivot, and it's okay to give up something, whether it be an ability or a role or maybe some points in some cases, as long as that denies your opponent more of whatever that is, right? And that's not an easy thing to do, which kind of comes back to this idea of toolboxes for me personally, being able to adapt to each of those. And yes, totally, you have a plan when you go into a tournament, but being able to adapt at the table, super important.
No, I absolutely love that, and I think that's a great note to end on as well. And I'm cautious of time, guys, so I'm sure us 3 could probably talk about secondaries lists and all sorts for hours. But guys, I really want to say thanks so much for coming on. It's been an absolutely pleasure to talk to you. So where can the guys find more about you? Obviously you've got your YouTube channel, and I'll put all the links to that in the show notes, which will be www.vanguardtactics.com/blog/S2EP3. So you head there, all the show notes will be on there, everything that we've discussed and spoke about, all the links to your YouTube, Instagram as well. But I hear you guys have got a bit of a special announcement, and Brian, I'll put that to you. So what's happening in your world at the moment that you want to tell the guys about?
Yeah, so here in America where we are, we can't really play in any tournaments yet. And Adrian and I are so used to doing that, we've been missing out. And so at the start of 9th edition, what we've decided to do on the channel is run a very unique kind of tournament on our channel. And so we're calling it the Tabletop Titans tournament, the TTTT. And with this tournament, what we're doing is we're just picking 8 factions, and we're going to play single elimination. Adrian and I are going to play all the armies. And we're going to do it over about a period of 3 weeks, starting Saturday the 22nd on our channel. And we encourage you to come follow along, cheer for your favorite faction. And you can come to our YouTube channel right now, and we have a post up that's showing off all the different armies, the schedule, which armies are playing what. If you go to our Facebook as well, you'll see all the different armies, the lists. And we should have a video up also by now, which goes through the different factions that we're playing and the lists we're bringing and what's going on. It should be a lot of fun.
No, that sounds wicked. And when you've got the Blood Angel slot, let me know. I'll fly over, and I'm keen to play.
There we
go. We'd love to have you. Blood Angels is actually one of the factions that we previously didn't own in the studio. We have about 30-ish, 34 armies in the studio, but
Yep.
Blood Angels wasn't one of them. And actually, I've been furiously painting my Blood Angels this week. And so it's an army that's coming to the channel soon. I'm really excited for them.
Nice. Yeah, I've just sort of put the finishing touches, because I'll be honest, guys, I was a bit like, when ninth hit, I was like, Blood Angels are in a tough spot. Not gonna lie, they took it was like GW listened to all of the podcasts I did about Blood Angels and were like, Steve, no, we're not letting you do that anymore. No, we can't let you have the doubt. No. And I was like, right, problem, how do I solve it? So I've managed to get my list together. I'm happy with it. So, but honestly, guys, that sounds absolutely fantastic, and I really encourage absolutely everybody to go and check that out. I know I'll be tuning in, rooting for you guys. So again, thanks so much for coming on. It is really, really appreciated, and I wish you the best of luck with your tournaments, guys, as well.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us on. It was great.
No worries. And again, I'm sure, hopefully, have to get you back on in the future. Maybe when new codexes are out, and we can do some more quality reviews in the future.
Absolutely.
This podcast is sponsored by Foreground Publishing, who are one of the leading designers and manufacturers of tabletop pre-painted terrain. And check out the Vanguard Tactics Terrain series, which is perfect for competitive 40k games. Just unbox, build, and play. Now, I'm sure you'll agree that was an incredible podcast, and I just want to say a huge, huge thank you for Brian and Adrian for coming on to the show, and I cannot wait to get them back on in the future. But before I head off, I just want to say a massive thank you, and remember to do subscribe, and also please leave us a review, and one of you will be picked for our next 5-star review. And one more thing, we've got an incredible battle report lined up this week where we have the AdMech versus Craft World. That is going to be over on Vanguard Tactics YouTube channel, and also we have last week's show, which was also the Ultramarines versus Drakari. So go and check out those battle reports, as I think you'll really, really enjoy them. So I'll see you next week on the Competitive 40k podcast.